You are now listening to FireWall Chats with the IT-ISAC. Today's guest is Larry Clinton. Clinton is the president of the Internet Security Alliance and is also a faculty member of the Wharton School. Clinton has been twice named as one of the National Association of Corporate Directors' 100 most influential people in the field of corporate governance and is a two-term chair of the IT Sector Coordinating Council. He serves on the Cybersecurity Advisory Board for the Center for Audit Quality and the Cyber Advisory Board for the Better Business Bureau, and is certified in cyber risk management for corporate boards by Carnegie Mellon University.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Scott Algier. I'm the Executive Director of the IT-ISAC, and it's my great honor to be speaking today with my friend, Larry Clinton, the President and CEO of the Internet Security Alliance. Larry, thank you for joining us.
Scott, always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Well, thank you, sir. So I know you well. You're well known throughout the community, but just briefly, can you explain a little bit about the Internet Security Alliance and what your mission is?
Thanks. So the Internet Security Alliance is a trade association. It's organized as a trade association. Most of our members think of us as kind of 1/3 traditional trade association, 1/3 sort of think tank, and 1/3 sort of professional organization. From our name, a lot of people think we represent the internet industry. We do not. So our board of directors has representatives from all the critical industry sectors, and our mission is to integrate advanced technology with economics and public policy to create a sustainable system of cybersecurity. The two keywords in that mission statement are economics and sustainable. So we're not interested so much in the vulnerability of the day. We are interested in developing a system where we can be more secure. And we think that economics is a key factor that has largely been underestimated, and frankly, one of the reasons why we don't think we're making very much progress in terms of securing our cyber systems. From our point of view, things have always been bad, and they're getting worse and worse and worse. And part of that is because we have been thinking of the issue in too narrow a context. Think of it as really just solely an operational, technical issue, and it's not. It's an enterprise-wide risk management issue, has as many policy and economic aspects as it does technical, and we need to be approaching it on a broader context. So that's what we're about.
Sure. So what are the economics of cybersecurity?
Well, the economics of cybersecurity basically all favor the attackers. Attacks are cheap, easy, and profitable. Defense is hard. We're defending an inherently vulnerable perimeter. We tend to be reactive. We have to wait to see how they're attacking, usually, in order to respond. And we get no law enforcement. So cheap, easy, profitable, hard after the fact, a vulnerable perimeter and no law enforcement. And there are other factors, but basically all the economics of cybersecurity favor the attackers. From our point of view, that's why we're having so many attacks on our cyber systems. It's interesting to know, a lot of times people think we should be focusing on vulnerabilities. And obviously we need to focus on vulnerabilities. And the system is vulnerable. It was made vulnerable. It's an open system and it's getting more vulnerable all the time. But virtually all of our critical infrastructures are vulnerable. Our water system's incredibly vulnerable. Our surface transportation system's incredibly vulnerable. Our food system is incredibly vulnerable. We never hear about these guys getting attacked. We hear about cyber attacks all the time. Why? Because there's no money in attacking the surface transportation system. There are billions of dollars in attacking our cyber systems. The World Economic Forum now estimates that we're losing $2 trillion a year to cyber attacks. And to put that in perspective, if we looked at the cyber criminal nation, we put them all together, they would qualify for the G20. They're that big. They're about the same size as Mexico economically. We are facing a massive opponent here, and it's because all the advantages are on their side. So what we need to do is not just firm up our systems technologically, which we do need to do, but we need to have an economic system that's sustainable, and we don't.
Sure. So that's a couple of really interesting points there. So obviously, we're in COVID-19. How has the economic situation changed, if at all, throughout this pandemic we're under?
So I said that cyber attacks are cheap, easy, and profitable. Thanks to COVID-19, they are cheaper, easier, and more profitable. Amazingly so. As we all know, overnight with the virus, we all started to work at home. Some of us work at home anyway, but now virtually everybody works at home. And what that has done is forced us to use vast amounts of insecure technologies. And since we didn't plan for any of this, people who are using them haven't been trained. The managers haven't even been trained. So the entire system has gotten immeasurably more vulnerable. We have been pumping a ton of money, trillions of dollars, into the system, and the criminals have been going at it like crazy. And nobody really can even tell how much the attacks are up, but the estimates are they are up hundreds of percents. They are using the virus as a lure to get people to do stupid things, but they're also carrying on the normal cyber criminal activities. Also, we even also know that, of course, the nation states are involved in this. They're attempting to steal intellectual property, such as vaccine information, et cetera. So the whole system has gotten incredibly worse, and it's going to get even worse. Hopefully, we're going to eventually turn the corner on this pandemic and get the health aspects under control one way or another. But then we are going to go gangbusters to try to recapture the economy, because we will have lost enormous amounts of economic value. We've already lost enormous amounts. We're going to lose even more before we're finished. And so there's going to be a tremendous drive to recapture that. And what we have seen is that when we use technology to try to push economic growth and productivity, which we need to be doing, but when we do that, we tend to forget about security, because security is often seen as slowing down and cutting down on efficiency. And as the process is intensified so that we are making this catch up, I think we're going to be even more lax with respect to cybersecurity. So things are bad and they're going to get worse.
Mr. Optimism, what do we do? How do companies manage this, and whose responsibility is it?
Well, so one of the key things I think that is not often appreciated, particularly by our government partners, is that in the cybersecurity world, we're all on the same side. The bad guys are stealing personal data, corporate intellectual property, and national secrets. This isn't like Enron or WorldCom, where the government has to step in to protect the consumer. We're on the same side. They're attacking all of us. So when you say who's responsible, we all need to be responsible. We need to be working together in a proactive, collaborative partnership so that we can change the entire structure. Now, one of our main adversaries, of course, are the Chinese. Over the last 20 years, the Chinese have developed a series of conscientious programs where they have integrated their economics, their foreign policy, their technology, where they have exploited the vulnerabilities in Western democratic systems to steal our intellectual property, all of which are designed in a conscientious program called the Digital Silk Road, which is now going worldwide and infecting networks worldwide. Huawei is just the tip of the iceberg. There are tons of these massive cross-subsidized Chinese IT firms, Alibaba, Tencent, TikTok, Huawei, there are a ton of them, and they are having tremendous influence all over the world. So when you ask, what do we need to do? We need to be, we don't want to do what the Chinese have done. That's not our way. But we need to be as sophisticated and as conscientious in developing a real digital strategy. You and I have worked on these digital strategies for years, and they are, sad to say, fairly minimalistic. They use the same old techniques over and over again, making minor repairs. Some of them are very good. You've done a wonderful job with the IT-ISAC. Big fan, as you know. You need to be sharing information, but we have to do a lot more than share information. We need a conscientious program where we are developing the incentives, can undo some of the inherent economic disadvantages we have as a Western-style democracy dealing with our adversaries, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans. And we shouldn't even have to compete with the North Koreans. North Koreans are a third-rate economy, but in the cyber world, they are more sophisticated than we are in some ways strategically. So we need to have a real digital strategy that folds in the benefits that we have in the West: larger economy, hundreds of years of international collaboration, much more innovative, entrepreneurial spirit. We need to capture all of that in our collective self-interest. We haven't done that yet, but hopefully we will turn the corner. That's what's needed.
So kind of a rewrite of 20 years or so of U.S. policy.
Yes, I was just reading Dick Clark's really good book, The Fifth Domain. But one of the things Dick Clark was the cyber czar for both Bush and then Clinton. And one of the things that Clark says in his 2019 book is that our cybersecurity policy hasn't changed in the last 30 years. Well, the world has actually kind of changed a lot in the last 30 years. And particularly it's changed in the digital world, but we are basically doing the same things that we were doing during the Clinton administration. Our approach is basically the same. There's really very little in terms of new initiatives. I mean, there's some stuff on the margins, and we support that. We like the idea that CISA was created. That's great. We like the idea that there's a national risk management strategy. That's great. But we need to be doing much more. The Chinese are outspending us on digital technology by 1,000 to 1. They are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on AI, quantum computing, 5G, et cetera, et cetera. We're spending hundreds of millions. They are outspending us 1,000 to 1. The amount of money they're spending on STEM compared to what we spend is incredible. You know, they have a sophisticated strategy. They're going out and they are making deals all over the world to capture their telecommunication systems, putting Huawei in charge of their telecommunication systems. And they're doing it by making them a deal, making these countries a deal they can't refuse. They say, you know, we'll give you a 30-year loan at no interest to let us build your telecommunication system. And then they build it with Huawei technology, which is full of backdoors, so that they can hear and see everything that's going on. And this is happening in Europe, Latin America, Asia, even here in the United States. We need to completely rethink our cyber strategy. We need to be more conscientious. We need to be more strategic. We need to be more comprehensive.
Right. So there's that national strategy that you're talking about, but then what does this mean for corporations? So if you're a member of a board of director, your board of directors leading these corporations, in many cases multinational corporations, how do you navigate this world in which you have all these adversaries, nation state adversaries, well-funded adversaries? What does this mean for companies, how they're managed and how they're governed to defend against some of these attacks that they're seeing?
Unfortunately, private enterprise is not in the West receiving the kind of support that private enterprise, they have state capitalism, for example, in China, slightly different model, obviously, but they're much more supportive of that. We are basically on our own here for the most part. However, there is certainly good news. The private sector has been much more creative and aggressive with respect to developing enhancements with how to manage cybersecurity than the public sector has. So for example, you mentioned corporate boards. There was an initiative from the National Association of Corporate Directors several years ago to develop a handbook for corporate boards that would instruct them how to address cybersecurity. They have 5 core principles, and then they have a whole bunch of toolkits embedded in these programs. And the good news about it is that these programs have actually been independently assessed and found that they work. So PricewaterhouseCoopers, which was completely independent to this, did some research on what the corporate boards were doing on cybersecurity and found that organizations that followed these principles had better budgets, better cyber risk management, closer alignment of cybersecurity with their business goals, and a better culture of security. Those are key elements in order to better defend your systems. One of the other things that has happened, been spearheaded by the private sector, and we are trying to get our government partners to coordinate on this, we have developed much better methods for cyber risk assessment. So cybersecurity obviously is a fairly new discipline. It's whatever you want to say, 20, 30 years old. For a long time, we really did not have good mechanisms, good methodologies to do cyber risk assessment. So what we had instead were these enormous checklists of requirements, you know, the NIST framework and the ISO frameworks and all this kind of thing. And basically, corporations just went through and checked the box, tried to figure out what was working. Problem is that none of these things were ever tested to figure out whether or not they actually enhance security. In fact, a fellow named Dan Hubbard wrote a really good book called How to Manage Anything in Cybersecurity, where he did a review of the literature on these checklists and found there wasn't a single one of the checklists that had ever been proven to actually enhance security. Meanwhile, government is telling industry to do this. The good news is that over the last several years, there has been a real evolution in cyber risk assessment methodology. So we now have a series of tools that have come on board, things like factor analysis of information risk and X analytics, which take these frameworks and repackage them in a coherent mechanism that enables organizations for the first time to understand their cyber risk on an empirical and economic basis so that they can do a much better job of determining what is their risk appetite and then calibrating their cyber risk assessment to their unique cyber risk so that they can do a much more cost-effective mechanism, for actually mitigating or transferring their risk. So we are making some progress in this regard, but as I say, in the West, mostly private sector is on their own. We need a much more collaborative process with the government. We don't need more regulation, thank you very much. Frankly, they don't know how to regulate in this space. They really don't have any expertise for the most part. I mean, obviously there's some people who do, but for the most part, the government is not as far along as the private sector in terms of cybersecurity, which by the way makes sense because the private sector is infinitely larger, has many more resources, more sophistication, more people. So of course the private sector knows more about cybersecurity than the government does. We need to be working together so that we can have a much stronger, unified collective defense.
So what does this collective defense model look like? We've been working on these partnership structures since 1996, I think, 98. My memory's getting a little hazy. PDD 63, whenever that was, I guess was President Clinton was the first one to propose this. Called for sector-specific information sharing organizations, built a structure with sector coordinating councils, matched to government coordinating councils and sector-specific agencies to build this partnership model. It's at least these structures themselves are 20 years old. The IT-ISAC celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. So what's this new collective defense model look like, or what does it need to look like in order to defend against this increasingly robust threat that we're seeing?
Well, so several things, obviously. First thing to do would be to actually use the structure that was created. You and I have been, in these structures for a long time. I was chair of the IT Sector Coordinating Committee for several years. I was vice chair for a number of years. If we met with the Government Coordinating Council once a year, that was a lot. And they were pro forma meetings. They didn't pay any attention to us. There were really no collective programs. I'm not sure it's much better now. Some sectors are better than others. But the truth is that I don't think we ever robustly used the structures, which were frankly kind of visionary back in the 90s to do those kind of things. I thought those were really good ideas, but I don't think we've ever really used the structures well. When we have used the structures, our conceptualization of the issue has been excessively myopic. People think of this as an IT technical issue, and it's got IT and technical components to it, but it's a much broader issue. As I said, if you look at some of our adversaries, they're thinking of this much more in a strategic fashion. We don't really have a cyber strategy. We have a list of cyber tactics, information sharing, sector coordinating council. These are tactics. It's no overall strategy. That's what we need. We need a strategic, collaborative approach, and we need to inject economics into the model, which has not been done. So, and you've heard me talk about this for years, we've developed the NIST framework. We were both involved in doing this. It was a great idea. The process to develop it was great, but the president's executive order said, develop the NIST framework and then demonstrate its cost effectiveness and then provide incentives for its use. We've never done any of those things. We have the NIST framework, and NIST and the government has refused to ever even test it. So we don't know what works. And there are no incentives, there are no economic incentives, and the economics of cybersecurity is kind of complicated. A lot of the things we think we know about the economics of cybersecurity turn out not to be true. For example, people assume that if a corporation suffers a major hack, that the stock price will go down and there'll be tremendous penalty, from the shareholders. It's not true. Most of the time when stock price, they do go down quickly, and then they rebound, they go higher. So stock prices don't go down with respect. Now, that doesn't mean that breaches are good for stock prices. What that means is that we don't understand how the economics of this system work. We don't compensate people for building secure products. And because we don't compensate people for building secure products, we don't teach secure coding in most schools. The economic model that we use in IT is get your product to market fast and then fix it later with updates and patches. There's no incentive to provide security on the front end. We all say, oh, it should be built in, not bolted on, but that's not it. In fact, the entire IoT evolution now, much of these IoT devices don't even have the capacity to put encryption in because it costs money. So we need to fundamentally alter the economics of this system. We need to study what we're doing, and we need to have an idea of what we're trying to do, a strategy. We don't have a strategy. The other problem is, by the way, money. We're going to have to get it through our thick heads that we're going to have to spend some money on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a competitive business. The Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Chinese, they are all competing against us. And, we're not playing. So to put it in terms you and I understand, Scott, we're playing like we're the National League. We're hitting our pitcher. And those guys, they're playing with the DH. So we're going to lose most of the time. And we are losing most of the time. There are studies that have come out that show that the Europeans, the Latin Americans are increasing. If you look at how they vote in the UN, they are increasingly moving away from Western positions and more in line with Chinese and Russian positions because those guys are giving them money. We're going to have to invest in some of this, and we're not willing to do it. And if we're not willing to do it, we're going to lose.
So Larry, this has been great. We're coming up on the end of our time here. So is there anything positive you have to say?
No, as I said, we do have models. We're developing more effective ways to do cyber risk. The corporate boards are developing models for them to use, and the models that were originally created here in the United States are now being expanded. So the program that the National Association of Corporate Directors developed here in the US with ISA has now been replicated by the European Conference of Directors Associations and has been replicated by the Organization of American States and has been replicated by the Germans. It's been enhanced by the German government. The same thing with the Japanese Business Council, which is their Chamber of Commerce. So at least on the private sector side, I think that there's an increased awareness that we need to be more aggressive about this. We are having some success with the government, but it's just not enough. CISA is a great thing. I think Chris Krebs done a great job. I like Bob Koloska. DHS people have been good. But as I said, the economics of this are just so daunting. I mean, there's one economist in the entire Department of Cybersecurity with regard to cybersecurity. One economist. I mean, and it's an economic issue. We're being outspent, on every category. There's no way we can compete with this. So I think awareness is the good thing. And I think that there is more awareness in the private sector than in the public sector. And those are the things that make me the most optimistic.
A lot of challenges before us, right? A lot of work ahead of us to do. But I want to acknowledge that your work over the last 20 years that I've known you has been phenomenal, both individually through the alliance there, through the ISA, but also your leadership through the Sector Coordinating Council for many years, a founding member of it. It's been great to have you here on this podcast today. Thank you for joining us. It has also been wonderful to have you as my friend for the last 20 years, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing.
Well, I say exactly the same about you, Scott. You've been a great partner and a great friend, and I'm sure we're going to succeed. We'll just have to keep at it a little longer.
Keep at it, right? Yes. All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. You have a great evening.
All right, you too. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of FireWall Chats with the IT-ISAC. To listen to more FireWall Chats episodes, please visit www.it-isac.org.